Hello, Professor Owl, Tavo. Hi, I'm Chip Payette, and looking forward to having a discussion with you. I thought I would create a short video. This is taken from the 5 points that you have. Sorry, I'm not much of a video person here. Sorry. In your discussion with Sheng, you laid out a 5 point argument, yeah, or 5 points that you thought made a case for at least the potential of Jesus as divine, as God, in some way, manner, shape, or form. And I had some real problems with all five of those. So, as I said in one of our earlier discussions, I would actually really be interested in talking with you about, like I say, what you mean when you say that you were a lifelong atheist. I mean, what did that mean to you? Like, what were your favorite arguments as an atheist? What did you think were the most impactful, in refuting theism? And I am very curious what changed your mind. So that's something I think would be really interesting to talk about, on a personal level. I would be glad to share about my journey as well, in the opposite direction, from 30 years as a Roman Catholic to a long period as a kind of agnostic, well, kind of mystic, then agnostic, and then eventually just outright atheist, at which I've been for a little bit over a decade now. But coming back to these five premises, I thought this might be a really interesting place to begin the conversation. So I'm going to just briefly lay out, I just took like a quick AI summary of that video and those 5 points. I have listened to it, kind of again, and I think it was close enough that it should be a good starting point. So your first point, like I said, when you started talking about, in choosing from the existing religions, that we have, and that immediately grabbed my attention because my first thought was, well, what if the true religion hasn't actually been revealed yet? Why do we have to choose from among the existing religions? That seems like a just a little bit of a starting failure. I don't think that's justified. I mean, I understand why you would do that because you can't postulate anything about a religion that doesn't exist yet. But it is always a possibility that the quote unquote true religion, true God has not been revealed, and that just because we already have a lot of religion doesn't mean that any of them are actually true or real or correct. So I didn't like that starting point. I think that was a very weak foundation for even beginning the conversation. But given that we can't postulate anything about, okay, a non-existent religion, um, I can see kind of why you started that, but I think that is a false premise because it assumes that one of the existing religions is the real one. Secondly, you talked about Jesus being uniquely venerated, the syncretism of other religions and how Jesus is venerated in some ways, in Buddhism, and I don't really know about Hinduism. You mentioned Zoroastrianism. My wife is a Zoroastrian. Zoroastrians really don't venerate Jesus in any way, shape, or form. Not it's just not really relevant. Um, but my it, again, this is kind of I see it as a non sequitur. The fact that other religions venerate Jesus is simply unrelated to the truth value of Jesus, or the truth of the claims about Jesus. Simply meaningless. There is no the point does not follow that you know Jesus this and this religion exists, these other religions exist, these other religions kind of think that Jesus is maybe pretty cool and had some cool things to say. That says nothing about whether or not it's true. So again, a bad starting point. They're simply a non sequitur. They do not follow. Uh, your next point was about Jesus as a unique intellectual, special luminary, figure across multiple disciplines and things like that. Um, and Sheng did kind of push back here a little bit, and I think rightfully so, is that again, that doesn't follow from, I mean, it doesn't, the truth of Jesus or the truth of Christianity does not follow from that. It, you can have, I mean, there have been many unique luminary humans, um, in human history that have equally impacted the world. Socrates and Plato and Confucius and the Buddha. There are other religious figures and other non-religious figures. Scientists. Newton, I think, has equally influenced as many people as Jesus. And he's not religious, but I think Newton's and laws of physics. Kepler, Galileo. These are other people who are luminaries, not in religious senses, but they are unique and they have uniquely impacted human history. That doesn't mean that they're divine. It just means that they came up with some really amazing ideas. So that is simply, again, that's a non sequitur. Whether he's unique or special in some way does not say anything about whether or not it's true. And that's what's most important. I guess one other thing, actually, I wanted to go back to the very beginning. You mentioned at the beginning of those 5 points, you mentioned whether or not um, any of those other possibilities that Shane talked about, the other theories of the resurrection or something. You mentioned about, oh, sorry about that weird shadow in the bottom. That's my dog. Um, sorry, it probably looked really weird. It's just my dog. Um, they weren't really spiritually nourishing. And my red flags went off. My atheist red flags went off there. And I was just thinking, spiritually nourishing, what does that mean? What does that have to do with anything? Again, spiritually nourishing has nothing to do with truth or accuracy or reliability. That's a metaphysical statement, an emotional statement that is not related to truth. So again, I didn't like that as a starting point. I believe that was a false foundation for a discussion about whether or not it is true, and that's what is most important to me in this discussion is truth. But coming back to Jesus as unique, special, luminary being, um, this idea that just because a human being has these really remarkable, unique ideas, it says nothing about whether or not they're true as or divine. Sorry, not true, but it says nothing about whether they're divine. Um, I think of like in our modern times, in recent times, humans created space probes, Voyager 1, Voyager 2, that have now traveled beyond the solar system. Um, did Jesus do anything like that? I don't think so. Um, More recently, scientists created, designed, built, and launched another satellite that traveled through the sun's coronasphere. Did Jesus do anything like that? Yeah, yeah, no, not really. Um, so no, I don't think that what Jesus was necessarily unique or special in some way that made him divine, unless I think we should start calling these scientists that can achieve these wonders, um, you know, divine. I just don't think that. Again, it's just it's not true. Um, in terms of the syncretism and these, things being merging of ideas, and Jesus is being mentioned in, multidisciplinary studies and things like that. Again, big deal. I mean, I think that can easily be explained not by divinity, but by three very human things. And I would say cultural bias, survivorship bias, and the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. Um, you know, Jesus, Christianity has been the dominant um, idea, the worldview, cultural foundation and stuff for the West, um, for the last couple thousand years. In the other half of the world, in the East, so to speak, Jesus is pretty useless and meaningless and has no, it probably barely comes up in their multidisciplinary speaking, research at all. So cultural bias, it's only in the West that Jesus is seen that way. Most of the East, Christianity is just, it's what those people over there believe. Big deal. It just so again, survivorship bias. It's what survived. It's what has lasted. And then again, Texas sharpshooter fallacy is what I kept hearing during your conversation with Sheng was, um, you would cherry pick a few studies, but I wonder really what that would look like if you put all of the studies, all of the research on philosophy, metaphysics, ethics, morality. If we took all of that from the entire world, would Jesus really be that unique or special and have that big of an outsized role? I kind of doubt it. So I think you're cherry picking. You're looking for the holes in the wall that fit what you want to believe, and you're finding those and you're circling them. So I don't think that that's very impressive. My fourth point on this, Jesus' teachings and stuff like that. Um, I don't think Jesus was a very special, moral figure. I mean, Matthew 5:17 specifically states that Jesus taught to uphold the law of Moses. The law of Moses was horrific, it's barbaric, monstrous. It condoned slavery, sex slavery, concubinage, genocide. I mean, countless bad. And Jesus taught to uphold that. And he said that, if the intensifiers immediately after, when he talked about you must be more righteous than the Pharisees to enter heaven. Well, the Pharisees were the ones who taught to follow the law of Moses. Um, then he uses the intensifiers, like about the ones like I tell you that if you have just looked upon a woman with sin, you have committed sin. He's basically essentially teaching thought crime. Um, it's not just actually cheating on somebody. If you just even think about it, oh, you're a cheater, you're an adulterer. you know, that's highly luminous, special, unique, divine. No, I'm sorry, I don't think so. I don't think you can get there. So I think if you're going to talk about Jesus being unique, divine, a special luminary, you need to be a lot more specific and relate it back to the Bible. And that's what I'd really like to talk to you about is the Bible, because you can't know anything about Jesus without using the Bible. And when I say about Jesus in the Bible, I mean what did Jesus say in the Bible, not what did Paul say in the Bible, because I don't think Paul and Jesus agreed on much. Um, I think Paul contradicted Jesus on almost everything. And if anything, I think many of the better parts of Christianity come from Paul. It might almost be better off called Pauliani. Oh, he's got some bad stuff too. Um, so yeah, so I've got a lot of problems with that particular point right there. A lot. I don't think you have a good foundation for any of it, quite frankly. Um, the I guess that's yeah, I think it was the fourth one you talked about anti-fragility. Christianity has uniquely resisted the trend of theological systems relegating miracles to mythology kind of. I think you're kind of ignoring what's happening in a lot of Christianity, where especially more progressive liberal Christianity tends to look at those miracles and think, yeah, maybe not. Jesus was a good teacher and he was probably divine, but he probably didn't actually walk on water. He didn't really, turn 5 loaves into 5,000 or whatever. So, but you're also ignoring the fact that Christianity has been fracturing into literally tens of thousands of denominations. Christianity is not anti fragile. If anything, I think Christianity is extremely fragile. The number of denominations now that think, I mean, at least half of Christianity thinks the other half of Christianity is going to go suffer in hell for all eternity for doctrinal reasons specific to the Bible, very specifically to the Bible. So I don't, again, I think your point there fails. I don't think that's a good foundation, and especially not for evaluating the truth of the matter. Um, you made a point then again about Jesus's impact on Jewish life. Again, no, I don't think you can substantiate that. Judaism rejected Jesus. The Hebrews, Israelites rejected Jesus. Christianity grew up in the the Greek-speaking uh, part of the empire, not among the Hebrews. You know, today Jesus, Jews today still reject Jesus. Why would you say that Jesus had a significant, meaningful impact on Jewish life when they rejected him? And I think for good reason, because he did not fulfill any of the prophecies in the Old Testament, not one in the original context. You have to reread it. You have to have a spiritual eye, spiritual meaning, secondary fulfillment. No, I don't think you can justify that at all. I think your point there fails completely. Um, and then you get to the quantitative and qualitative evidence from early Christianity. And pardon me, I kind of had to laugh on that one. I think I genuinely laughed out loud when I heard you say that. Um, the earliest fragment we have of any gospel comes from 100 years after Jesus died. None of the non-Christian writers about Jesus were even born when Jesus was dead, when he was crucified. Um, the earliest documentation of Paul we have is from nearly 160 or 170 years after the crucifixion. And you want to say that that's quantitative data about a dead person rising to life? I just had to laugh. I mean, how you claim to have been a lifelong atheist, but now you're thinking that there's good reason for maybe thinking that, oh, maybe somebody, like maybe one person in all the 110 billion people who've ever lived on this planet, one person rose from the dead. Quantitative evidence for that testimony. All you have is testimony, documentations from hundreds to 200 years after. We don't have a full copy of all the Gospels until 350 years after the crucifixion. I don't know where you get quantitative and qualitative evidence from early Christianity. I, I just fail to see it. So, so I just have to reject that one completely out of hand. Um, and I will say, that was one of my biggest things when I was deconstructing. It was like, what do you mean we don't have anything? I mean, Jesus never wrote anything. We have nothing from Jesus. We only have writings from other people, talking about Jesus. Um, None of the things that we have, I mean, none of uh, the documentation that we have, even, I mean, it's all estimates. It's not, it's fuzzy. So, yeah, I'm starting to repeat myself a little bit now, but I just had to laugh when you said that one. But so anyway, I hope that lays out, I think, a pretty good explanation of why I think the five arguments that you put forth in your discussion with Sheng just fail. I don't think they have any relation to truth value, or the truth of the proposition of Christianity as a real, accurate, reliable, meaningful, true religion, faith, metaphysical something that's supposed to serve humanity. Um, and I just don't see Jesus in any way as a particularly special human being is worthy of more than mild veneration. Say, hey, okay, he had some good ideas. He had some really bad ones too. He had some really bad ones because he sported the law of Moses and the prophets, and there's some really shitty stuff in that. So yeah, I think you're going to need to be a lot more specific. And I heard a lot of vague generalities in that, and you're going to need to nail it down a lot more precisely to overcome that. But again, your first couple of points there, I just simply reject as not relating to the truth value of the proposition, and therefore they're meaningless. I don't care. Uh, I don't know why I should care. Uh, so anyway, I hope you find this helpful. And I would love to have a discussion with you about it and see if we can nail it down. Maybe you've got some more points that can change my mind. So I will talk to you later.